Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Louise Minchin and Dan Walker.
Our headlines for you at 6 o'clock. Boris Johnson urges people to use common sense as he defends his plan to relax the lockdown in England.
Our challenge now is to find a way forward that preserves our hard-won gains while easing the burden of the lockdown. And I will be candid with the House, this is a supremely difficult balance to strike.
Back to school, new guidance will see class sizes of 15 pupils, staggered break times and frequent hand washing.
Will workers be furloughed for longer? The Chancellor is set to announce the next steps for the scheme, which subsidises the wages of millions of people.
Elite sport is given the go-ahead to start again from June the 1st, but there will be no fans in stadiums for a long time, with no date set for when they'll be allowed to reopen.
And the chilly weather story continues. Widespread frost for England and Wales this morning. Parts of Scotland later could see some snow. I'll have all the details here on Breakfast.
Hello, very good morning to you. It's Tuesday, May the 12th. Our main story, Boris Johnson has defended his plans to relax the lockdown rules in England at a faster rate than the rest of the UK. The government's issued guidance to try and clear up some of the confusion that has surrounded the proposals.
In England, from tomorrow, people can go outdoors as often as they want and can meet with one person from another household in a public space as long as social distancing is respected.
If you can't work from home, the advice is to go back to work from tomorrow. Guidance on how public transport can cope will be issued later today.
In a new development for England, people are advised to wear face coverings in enclosed spaces like trains and buses. And from the 1st of June, there will be a phased return to schools and nurseries, again in England. Last night, new guidance was issued with limits on class sizes to 15 pupils, and there were calls for staggered drop-off and pick-up times.
We're also expecting an announcement by the Chancellor on the future of the coronavirus job retention scheme, which subsidises the wages of more than 6 million people. Our reporter, John McManus, has this report.
There had been accusations that the Prime Minister's new strategy was confusing. And at Monday evening's Downing Street press conference, members of the public questioned Boris Johnson directly.
How is it logical that I, as a primary school teacher, can mix with the many returning children, but seeing my relatives is still not allowed?
Yesterday you left the nation with more questions than answers. Why have you been so vague with who can start back at work and which businesses can reopen this week?
It's when you come to take small steps back to normality, as we are now, that clearly the message becomes finer, more complicated.
On Sunday, Mr Johnson had said people in England could go back to work from Monday if it was safe, and he advised against using public transport to get there, an impossibility for many. But yesterday he said he didn't expect there to be a rush of people heading to their workplaces this week, and the government's new strategy document has indicated how workspaces should be kept what it calls COVID secure. All employers will have to carry out a risk assessment before they can resume operations. The TUC has called the move a step in the right direction. But the problem of public transport remains. The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says he's working with operators on how to bring services back to normal, though that won't solve the problem for most commuters of keeping 2 metres apart. One partial solution is masks, though again Boris Johnson said wearing them was advisory, not mandatory. And if people can't return to work, well, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak will give more details about the furlough scheme later today, which is paying the wages of millions of employees. But Labour's leader says the government's messaging has sowed confusion.
What the country needs at this time is clarity and reassurance, and at the moment both are in pretty short supply.
And looming over all of this is the increasing death toll. In the last 24 hours, 210 people have died in the UK across all settings. There have now been a total of 32,065 deaths. The new strategy has laid out other details aimed at bringing back a degree of normality to life in England. One idea is for a household bubble, where 2 households can interact with each other, but not with others. Another is for primary school children to be back at their desks for a month before summer in class sizes of 15. Their start and finish times and lunch times would be staggered with more use of outdoor space. One measure which is UK-wide is the quarantining of most international arrivals, but there's no start date yet. And in the devolved nations, there's real anger at London's partial lifting of the lockdown.
I want to reiterate that those announcements do not apply yet here in Scotland. That is not, let me stress, for any political reason.
Scotland and Wales will continue to tell their public to stay at home, while the Stormont government in Northern Ireland will lay out its plans later today. John McManus, BBC News.
Let's get a little bit more analysis from our political correspondent Jessica Parker, who's in Westminster for us. Morning to you. And what's absolutely clear about this, Jessica, is the public want information. There was criticism about a lack of clarity. There has been more details, though. Morning.
Yeah, good morning. And I think you saw that at the press conference last night with those pre-recorded questions from members of the public, because there was this sort of big gaping hole after Boris Johnson, of course, laid out his broad roadmap on Sunday evening, but didn't really fill in the details. Labour said that there was a lack of clarity, a lack of reassurance. Then yesterday afternoon, of course, the Prime Minister did stand up in the House of Commons, and we started to get a kind of flurry of documents coming from the government. So we had things, for example, on schools, as John has just been laying out. So class sizes, if primary schools do start to see a staggered return from June, shouldn't be more than 15 students to allow for social distancing. For workplaces, they want to ensure that social distancing rules are observed where possible, reinforced cleaning as well. So the government did start to fill in some of that detail. But I think as you move from a blunter, clearer stay-at-home message in England, at least, to this broader stay alert message, the government are trying to get people to engage more with that detail. But the problem yesterday was that they didn't really have the detail to engage with. We do expect more today on public transport, as you were saying a moment ago. But Boris Johnson's also been saying he wants to see people use a good old-fashioned British common sense as well. Meanwhile, as was just mentioned, as the government tries to encourage some people back to work, could be quite an important development today. We expect the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, to update us on the job retention scheme. Of course, that's paying an awful lot of people's wages at the moment. 6 million having 80% of their wages paid up to £2,500. That currently runs out at the end of June, so that will be a very important update for a lot of people as to what happens with that scheme.
Well, listen, thank you very much for the moment. We'll get more from you later too as well.
Just a reminder, our government interview today is 7:30 as per usual. We'll be speaking to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. And before him, we'll hear from the Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner. She's going to be here about 7:20. So if you've got any questions for either of those, do get in touch. bbcbreakfast@bbc.co.uk.
And thank you for all your questions so far. There are lots. It's not just England where the lockdown is being relaxed. Singapore is also planning to let some businesses reopen as well.
Let's speak to our Asia business correspondent, Karishma Vashvani, who is there. Thank you very much for being on the programme with us today. So give us an idea of what is the plan in Singapore?
Well, Singapore is slowly beginning to relax some of the restrictions that were put in place on April the 7th. They don't call it a lockdown here. The government calls it a circuit breaker. But, you know, by any other name, it is effectively a partial lockdown. What we're seeing today is a small cluster of businesses being allowed to open. These are things like hairdressers for a simple haircut, no longer than an hour, for instance. You can go to the pet store now and even to the bakery to buy some desserts and cakes. But all of this is being extremely carefully controlled and managed. And the Singapore government has been relying on technology to ensure that the people who do go into these shops, go into the offices, they have to virtually check in and check out using an app called Safe Entry. And that's because the government wants to keep tabs on people in case there's a new cluster of infections. In fact, technology has become so much a part of the response here in Singapore that if you go to one of the parks here, for instance, you might bump into this robot dog. I think you can see pictures of him on your screen right now. He's being trialed in some Singapore parks to encourage people to maintain their social distance from one another. So certainly a vision of the future from Singapore, where some people have liked it and others not so much.
It's incredible pictures. Karishma, thank you very much for that. We'll speak to you a bit later on. That's an update on a robot dog live from Singapore.
Stonehenge has been hosting the summer solstice celebrations for around 5 millennia, but this year's event has been cancelled because of the coronavirus. Around 10,000 spectators usually gather at the ancient monument in Wiltshire to mark midsummer on June the 21st. English Heritage, which runs the site, says the sunrise will be streamed online for anyone who wants to watch it.
Those are some of the main stories around this morning. It's 6:10. Loads to come in the programme, but anyone who used public transport to commute to work before the virus will remember the problems of late, cancelled and overcrowded services.
So how will it work when passenger numbers creep back up and there are even fewer buses, train and trams with just a fraction of their previous capacity? Breakfast Tim Muffet has been talking to commuters.
Avoiding public transport. Easier said than done. This was Canning Town Tube Station in London yesterday. Adelaide filmed his commute for us. He's a security guard.
I just got to the train station on the tube. It was just literally jam-packed with people on there. And it was a bit worrying unlike previous days where you get to see like loads of space and everything. So it was a bit worrying this morning.
Compared to other jobs, men working in security have the highest death rate from Covid-19, according to research released yesterday by the Office for National Statistics. Later, we met Eric, who's also a security guard.
There were more people on the train than usual.
How did you feel about that?
Uncomfortable. I don't think they understood the 2-meter distance. The information is not clear. It's absolutely not clear, so we don't know who to follow, what to listen to.
The people who say, oh, don't avoid public transport if you can, what do you say to that?
It's not possible. It is not possible. How are you going to go, how are you going to travel from Gravesend to London Bridge? Are you going to walk?
This morning, yeah, it was a lot busier. The tube is definitely. Obviously, some people don't have the luxury of driving.
Do you feel safe going on public transport?
Not really, but there's no other option.
People in England are now being encouraged to wear face coverings in enclosed spaces such as public transport. Scotland has already issued similar guidance, and it's likely to make commuting feel even more different than it does already.
Prevention is better than cure. Why would you want to kill something when you can prevent it in the first place?
I've kind of taken the view that if it's not being encouraged officially, then that's a personal choice, not one I'd take. But if they're now going to say we should, then why haven't we done it sooner?
It was quite busy today, yeah. I was quite shocked, to be honest with you. But I'm not surprised.
And we're now all being encouraged to wear masks on public transport, so you've got yours
No,
already?
there was hardly anyone on the carriage that was wearing it, apart from me.
And how does that make you feel?
Quite anxious, but I'm not surprised.
In some places, public transport hasn't been as busy. But on the Metrolink tram service in Manchester, for example, there are fears that as government guidance takes effect tomorrow, passenger numbers will grow.
I think from Wednesday it probably will increase loads more again. Yeah.
That is actually my main concern, is actually being on the trams and being packed like sardines.
If people listen, then be sweet. If they don't, then there's nothing we can do. If we're going to get locked down even more, and then who is it to blame?
As the first steps towards easing lockdown in England are taken, so the questions and challenges keep coming. Tim Muffet, BBC News.
We're talking about transport with somebody talking about buses a little bit later, because it's absolutely clear, you know, social distancing is going to mean massive changes, isn't it?
The world is going to be very different on so many sort of levels once we do come out fully the other side of this.
Should we have a look at the front pages of the newspapers this morning? The Daily Mail leads on the government's announcement that families in England will be able to meet up again, but say it must be outside and 2 metres apart.
Times also leads on the new rules for England, saying people will be able to play an outdoor sport with a friend or family member from outside the household for the first time in more than 6 weeks.
The Sun reports that desperate grandparents could be able to hug their grandchildren from next month. The paper says government scientists are working on plans to allow over 70s to see members of another household.
And show the Daily Record, they have an unlikely headline of "Don't visit Scotland" as the First Minister Nicola Sturgeon warns those in England not to cross the border.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.